One had rather hoped that the bottom of the barrel had already been scraped, that the dregs had been drunk, that we had exhausted the possible permutations of executive corruption and constitutional vandalism. But no, President Trump has now issued what he terms full, complete, and unconditional pardons to 77 individuals implicated in the conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election, including that sodden, disbarred remnant of respectability, Rudy Giuliani, the conspiracy-addled Sidney Powell, and an entire rogues gallery of fake electors, Trump campaign operatives, and attorneys who should have been disbarred years before they actually were. Let us be plain about what occurred here, shall we? This was a coordinated scheme to manufacture fraudulent electoral college certificates in 7 states that Trump had lost, with the intention of presenting these forgeries to Vice President Mike Pence, in hopes he would either count them instead of the legitimate certificates or delay certification entirely. Call it what you will: election contestation, legitimate legal challenge, concerned citizenship, but fraud remains fraud even when committed by people wearing flag pins and invoking the Constitution they're actively violating. And now, these architects and foot soldiers of deceit have been granted absolution by the very man whose electoral humiliation they sought to reverse. The pardon proclamation, posted on social media by Trump's pardon attorney with the nauseating exultation, "No MAGA left behind," describes the prosecutions as a grave national injustice perpetrated upon the American people. This sort of Orwellian inversion would be impressive if it weren't so transparently cynical. The Ministry of Truth at least bothered to work at its propaganda. This lot simply assumes that shamelessness itself is a sufficient substitute for persuasion. Let us consider who precisely has been pardoned. Rudy Giuliani, who has been disbarred in both Washington and New York for his mendacious advocacy of Trump's fraudulent election claims, and who lost a $148 million defamation judgment to 2 Georgia election workers whose lives he helped destroy with his conspiracy theories. Sidney Powell, purveyor of Baroque fantasies about Venezuelan voting machines and communist plots, who pleaded guilty in Georgia to charges relating to election interference. John Eastman, who authored the memo instructing Vice President Pence on how to stop the counting of electoral votes, a document that combined constitutional illiteracy with authoritarian ambition in equal measure. And Mark Meadows, the chief of staff who was informed by the White House counsel's office that the alternate electors scheme was not legally sound, yet proceeded anyway. Now, the regime and its apologists will protest that these pardons are largely symbolic, because none of those named face federal charges, presidential pardons not extending to state crimes. But the symbolism here is precisely the point. Trump is declaring with the full weight of presidential authority that the conspiracy to overturn American democracy was not merely excusable but praiseworthy, that those who participated deserve not punishment but honor. Consider the historical parallels that suggest themselves. When Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, he at least had the decency to couch the act in terms of national healing and to acknowledge that crimes had occurred even if they were to go unpunished. Trump's proclamation, by contrast, describes its beneficiaries as great Americans who were persecuted for challenging an election, as if organizing fraudulent electoral certificates and conspiring to pressure state officials were the moral equivalent of filing a lawsuit or demanding a recount. The White House press secretary's defense is particularly revealing in its derangement. Getting prosecuted for challenging results is something that happens in communist Venezuela, not the United States of America, she declared. One observes that the phrase challenging results is being asked to bear a weight it was never designed to carry, namely the defense of systematic fraud masquerading as democratic participation. And since she raised Venezuela, Chavez and Maduro stayed in power precisely by employing what Trump attempted, manufacturing electoral legitimacy through fraud, intimidation, and institutional capture, all while insisting they were merely challenging results. The difference, the crucial constitutional difference, is that in America, such attempts are supposed to be prosecuted, not pardoned. By issuing these pardons, Trump moves America one step closer to the Venezuelan model his spokeswoman purports to deplore. Trump has systematically worked to delegitimize electoral defeat itself as a political concept. He has repeatedly claimed that the 2020 election was stolen, despite courts across the country and government officials finding no evidence of fraud that could have affected the outcome. These pardons are designed to embed that lie into the constitutional architecture, to establish as precedent that attempting to overturn an election through fraud and conspiracy merits not prosecution but presidential protection. And let us not ignore the timing. In January, Trump had already pardoned some 1,500 January 6th rioters, including Enrique Tarrio, the Proud Boys chairman convicted of seditious conspiracy and sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. Now come the pardons for the conspiracy's organizers and enablers. The message could not be clearer. Trump rewards loyalty to himself over loyalty to the Constitution, personal fealty over democratic principle, participation in his schemes over respect for electoral outcomes. One is reminded, uncomfortable though the parallel may be, of the political cultures in which leaders systematically pardon those who commit crimes in their service. This is how democratic norms erode, not in a single catastrophic collapse, but through the steady accumulation of precedents that normalize the abnormal, that treat as acceptable what should be intolerable, that grant immunity to those whose only crime was excessive zeal in the service of executive power. The ultimate irony, or perhaps the ultimate insult, is that the pardon proclamation explicitly states it does not apply to the President of the United States. Even in his magnanimity, Trump cannot resist the lawyerly hedge, the constitutional escape hatch. He will absolve his co-conspirators while carefully preserving his own legal maneuverability. One is reminded that loyalty, in the Trump cosmology, is a one-way street. Those who commit crimes in his service receive absolution, while he retains the option to disavow them should circumstances require it. The American experiment in self-government has endured many assaults, many crises, many moments when its continuation seemed precarious. It has survived because, at crucial junctures, enough people, judges, legislators, bureaucrats, citizens, have valued democratic legitimacy over partisan advantage, constitutional principle over personal loyalty, the rule of law over the rule of men. These pardons represent a direct assault on that tradition. They announce that attempting to overturn an election carries no lasting consequence, that fraud in the service of power deserves protection, that the gravest threat to American democracy is not those who attack it, but those who dare to defend it through prosecution. We are left then with a president who has now pardoned both the violent mob that stormed the Capitol and the conspiracy that orchestrated the legal framework for the coup they sought to enable. The pardon power, designed as an instrument of mercy, a check against excessive harshness, a presidential prerogative to be exercised with discretion and restraint, has been converted into a tool of impunity, a mechanism for protecting criminal conspiracies and rewarding authoritarian loyalty. And so the barrel, it turns out, has no bottom after all, or rather we keep discovering new sub-basements of degradation, new depths beneath the depths we thought could not be exceeded. One almost longs for the days when presidential corruption consisted of mere financial impropriety or sexual misconduct, quaint vices compared to the systematic assault on electoral legitimacy we now witness. But then, nostalgia is always the luxury of those who have not yet fully grasped how much worse things can become. These pardons are not an ending, but a beginning, a precedent, a template, a promise of impunity for future attempts at what the conspirators themselves, in their unguarded moments, called the fake elector scheme. Remember that phrase. They named it themselves before the lawyers got involved and the spin doctors went to work. In their own words, they told us exactly what they were doing. And now their president has declared that doing it was not merely permissible, but commendable. That, more than any individual pardon, is the constitutional vandalism that demands reckoning. The question is whether Americans still possess the capacity for outrage, or whether they have become so inured to the assault that they can no longer muster the energy to resist it.